Welcome, everyone, to what I can't quite believe is a penultimate episode of Bios and Bookmarks Season 7. This is episode 5 of A Change is Gonna Come, which, as you know, if you've been with us this season, has been devoted to social justice. How can we, as Caribbean people, both living at home and in the diaspora, using the tools we have, change our world for the better? Especially in these fraught and uncertain times. We're extremely delighted today to have a new to Bocas guest, Marlon Peterson, author of Bird Uncaged, published by Bold Type Books. Marlon tells his remarkable personal story, which involves a lengthy period of incarceration and also devotes itself to examining how survival works and what it might look like under a better, more comprehensive, more compassionate lens. He'll be interviewed by guest host and no stranger to the festival, Amilcar Sanatan, who I have the pleasure of introducing. Amilcar is currently a PhD candidate in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. His poetry has appeared in Caribbean and international literary magazines. In 2020, he won the Bridget Jones Caribbean Arts Award for Poetry, and his creative nonfiction was shortlisted for the Johnson and Amoy Achong Prize for Caribbean Writers. He has performed spoken word poetry and coordinated open mics in Trinidad and Tobago for over a decade. I know that the conversation between Amilcar and Marlon is going to be rich, generative, and sustaining. Please join in sharing your comments and questions in the live chat, and we'll pass them on to Amilcar. Don't forget, the NGC Bocas Lit Fest is right around the corner from April 28th to May 1st. You can download our full festival guide on our website. We'll be sharing links throughout the course of this session. And as always, if you like and care about what we do here at the Bocas Lit Fest, please consider joining our Friends program. You'll see details about that at the end of this session. Thank you for joining and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Shivani Ramlochan. It's always a pleasure to be in the same space as you in this place we call our home and in the Caribbean as we try to forge and deepen the work and that tradition of a Caribbean literature and a space for the arts. And welcome all to Bios and Bookmarks from Bocas Lit Fest. And we all look forward to the NGC Bocas Lit Fest that will be here very soon. Today, I will be in conversation with Marlon Peterson. Marlon Peterson describes himself as a rightivist. He was born in the United States, but he identifies with the heritage and culture of his parents in the Caribbean. Marlon has blended his creative writing with activism. While incarcerated, he co-created Holla, How Our Lives Link All Together. He thinks about criminal justice reform. He has been a public speaker. He works with young people. He takes on a critical masculinities approach in his writing. And he's one of the emerging voices in Black American writing today. So it's a pleasure to be with Marlon Peterson. Marlon, how are you?
Yeah, I like the intro. Thank you. Nice to be with you. I know, for real, for real. Real
Like Marlon, I
nice.
didn't know if it was to come forward. You know what I mean? You have done so much work, and that
Yeah,
is an
yeah.
abridged version of your bio. Marlon, today we're going to speak about Bird Uncaged. Bird Uncaged, it was very relevant for me. Why? It resonated a lot with me as a young man from the region, and you were thinking about fatherhood, sonhood, being a good uncle, being a good brother, being a good son. You would also see a form of transnational parenting, which would have helped raise your brother one point in time, and movement. Your parents come to United States. You coming back to Trinidad to wind down the country, carnival, feel fully Trini yourself, but also your relationships, right, with women, with other men in your environment. and the bonds you created and the harm. And I think I don't know, ask more questions around the issues of failures in masculinity, which I felt
Mm.
you were very bold and brave in writing in your work. So before I go up and take your time, we would invite you to read from Brood Uncaged to our listeners who are very interested in hearing your work.
Chapter 1, Hiding. Dear Marlon, the first thing you should know is that you're a beautiful, brilliant, bubbly black boy. Your big black lips were just the right size. No need to hide them by folding them inwards. No need to hide your presence. You were talkative and that was okay. It was your way of sharing your light. No need to hide your voice by playing small. Your smile, your smile was contagious. No need to hide it by masking with screw faces. Your ability to carry on big people conversations as an 8-year-old was a gift. No need to hide your maturity. It was one of the ways you learned about the world. Even if you didn't raise your parents' phone bill to over $1,000 by calling 1-900 numbers to play Jeopardy. You were a nerd. No need to hide your intelligence. You should know that your 1980s Crown Heights Brooklyn neighborhood needed young boys like you to shine and inspire. Too many of you hid in cages of your own creation, but mostly in cages created for you. Often the two were indistinguishable. My mother, Elsa, is a hardworking woman who loves her children. She once was a little black girl in Trinidad who grew up in the 1940s and 1950s. She lived during a time when tightly coiled hair on a girl was considered nigger naps, something to be ashamed of and hide away. So my mom hid her hair on the berets to avoid feeling that she was ugly because of her hair. My mom was also plagued. My mom also witnessed both her biological father and her stepfather plagued by alcoholism, and her mom get beaten regularly by the latter. She told me and my pops about the abuse a handful of years ago. She kept that information hidden for over 60 years from two of the closest men in her life. Despite that part of her childhood, mine was the gem of her mother's eyes and spoiled. Daddy, also known as Jago, whose government name is Michael, was a saga boy, barber, and pan man. Saga boy is Trinity for a man who is always in fashion and who has a good for chicks. My father was also a steel band player back when my father was also a steel pan player back when only thugs and poor people were associated with the instrument. His band, North Stars, won the first two national panorama competitions in Trinidad, and he toured the Caribbean with his neighborhood band, West Side Symphony. I'm told he was nice with the Blades as a barber back in the 60s in Trinidad, but as a son who got daddy haircuts until my freshman year of high school, I beg to differ. Daddy grew up living between his biracial grandmother, his father, and his mother. The second oldest of seven, he learned how to survive with a few resources his parents had, with few resources, since neither of his parents had much of anything. His first exposure to Jehovah's Witnesses came through his grandmother, a Kitchen. His father was also a drunk, but a cool one, I'm told. I never met either of my grandfathers. They both died during my infancy, so it's the stories of my parents and older brother and sister that taught me about my grandfathers. Romanticized but sprinkled with some real. Michael and Elsa, both from the same St. James neighborhood in Trinidad, met each other at 18 and never looked back. They both brought the Kool-Aid smile of the American dream, though my pops admits today that he read and heard all about the racism in America before he left Trinity, but that he convinced himself that none of that racism was happening in New York. It was the South that he thought Black people had to fear in America. He was wrong. I saw the American television. I was attracted to the nice clothes, the parties, and the music. I wanted to try my hand at it. I saw the stories of racism, but I didn't realize how sick it was until I got here. They killed Martin Luther King right after I got here. I was real sad. I also was the first of the two to go to New York. She visited in 1965, a few months after Malcolm X was assassinated. She had a friend who lived in Harlem and frequented the Apollo often, but she was severely homesick. She was unaccustomed to the busyness of the day and frightened by the droves of heroin-addicted women and men who languished along the streets of Harlem. After only 8 months, she retreated back to Trinidad to her mom and her boyfriend, Jago. When Jago had saved enough money to travel to the US, he packed what few belongings he had and decided he would create a new life for himself in America. Elsa joined him. In 1967, they both officially made Brooklyn home, a one-room apartment in Bushwick with a shared bathroom and kitchenette. That was the exposure. That was their exposure to the American dream. 1 year later, they gave birth to my sister Kelly, who we called Kels, and 3 years after, my brother Mike. Both of my parents overstayed their visas and lived as undocumented residents of New York City, raising 2 young children with little money and agency. When they found a cigarette burn on Kells after they picked up from the babysitter, they told no one. They didn't call the police. They feared doing so would mean immigration finding them out, which would lead to deportation. So they figured the best way to deal with the situation would be to pull Kells out of the daycare and not allow Mike to go through anything similar. They decided to send infant Mikey back to Trinidad to live with his maternal grandparents. Mike stayed in Trinidad until 1976 when he was 5 years old. I think those 5 years away from our parents caused family drama that no parenting class could prepare my parents for. We didn't have cell phones or computers to communicate with someone living in another country. Airmail letters and expensive long distance calls were the only way of getting in touch. So for the first couple of years of Mike's life, he saw his grandparents as his parents. Of course, he knew of his real parents, but they were foreign to him in a foreign country. Kels would sometimes visit him during the summer months, so he knew his sister, but that could not curtail his feeling that his parents did not love him as much as Kels did. Mommy and Daddy could have joined Kels to visit Mike, but because immigration policy would have prohibited them from ever returning to the United States. So 2 years earlier, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 had abolished the American immigration quota system that gave preference to Western European immigrants and excluded everyone else. Prior to the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, American immigration policy gave preference to Western Europeans over Eastern Europeans, classic white-on-white violence executed through policy. In a speech at the American Committee on Italian Migration in 1963, President Kennedy described these quotas as, quote, nearly intolerable, end quote. The 1965 act signed by President Lyndon Johnson opened up American borders to Eastern Europeans and to others. My parents were among the others. Visitors' visas, the golden key that unlocked entry into the US, had expiration dates. If you overstayed the expiration date on that visa, you became civically illegal, an illegal immigrant, a legal alien, though I prefer the term undocumented resident. This ain't just an argument about semantics, though. Since the 1970s, the consequence of being caught overstaying a visa can mean deportation by the US government. So my parents avoided interactions with police, welfare agencies, and other parts of the US government that could expose them as undocumented. They were hiding within cages of their own making. With the help of borders that, though they had finally opened to Black and brown immigrants, limited the number to 20,000 per year, exactly. Poor working class immigrant families like mine made difficult decisions in order to avoid being labeled and deported by the government. My parents overstayed their visas, becoming a new nigger to America, illegal aliens. They sacrificed their Trinidadian discomfort for a new American discomfort that caged them through policy. Today, if they were to get caught, they'd be put in physical prisons built on old immigration policy. Survival isn't always logical to the observer. I'll stop there.
Very powerful opening, Marlon, and that's from the first chapter in the book, where you help provide some political, historical context, but also a genealogical one about your family history. And it's quite interesting in the way that you use that to forge your narrative. Sometimes we are in an environment where people write about themselves as if they enter history on the day that they are born. But you saw a much wider context. And tell me, what I love about reading your work is, yes, this is a memoir, but I feel very close to the figure of your mother and of your father and of your peers. Is very much a collective narrative. Many stories intersect into yours, and you take time to acknowledge that. Why make that choice?
Thanks for, first of all, this is a very good point and questions. One, I realized that none of my experiences were experienced in a vacuum. You know, meaning like I may have reacted to things differently from the next person, of course, but I knew that there were other people seeing things that I was seeing, or went through similar type things. But and going beyond that, you know, when you get older and you look back, you know, you see your parents as adults, not just as these figures who, you know, you honor, right? You see them, you're able to see them as full human beings beyond just your parent. And I think sometimes when we first see our parents as full human beings, we tend to want to just criticize them sometimes. Well, you did this, you did that, you could have did this. And I think that to me is important to like not to give context to what they may just give a little context to what they may have experienced. I don't know everything they would have experienced in the way they experienced it. My father now has dementia, so this is even more difficult to get things from him. But the point though is that um, there's this through line of people from certain communities struggling in ways that other people don't have to struggle. And even though I was born in the late, 1979, my parents were born in the 40s in the Caribbean in a completely different context. Things are similar in terms of how we organize society. Like that's what it was important for me to for my just to mention how my mother's here. We understand in a country predominantly black, there's still a way that we like white supremacy infuses there too. We can say, well, she has nappy hair. You know, once upon a time, and probably still so, people still denigrate women with full, tightly coiled hair. And I needed to like give context to what my mother may have experienced at that point in time. And then when my father, and I talk about steel pan a lot, I play steel pan, but like for those of us, who know the history and the context of the instrument, but the social context of the instrument, people weren't clapping for people who were pan artists back once upon a time in the way we laud them up now, right? People put their head down on people like that. And I need to give context to like what my father probably would have dealt with. Like he was having fun, he was young and a saga boy, but he was also viewed by a certain segment of society in a different kind of way, right? Even in, so for me to tell my story, it's like I can only really tell you the depth of my experience, obviously, but when you see the other people, the figures that come into the story throughout the book, even the people that hurt me, like to me, it's important, particularly the type of justice I believe in. I need to give context of like why would a human being do that thing, even though it's an egregious, it's harmful, it hurt me. After me, still be traumatized with. It's a human being. That means there was some thought, there was some social context that got a person to a place, and I don't need to excuse it and like it, or even what having to do with that person again. But I want to understand it, and I think for me to write this book, for me to really give an honest context, write an honest memoir, um, I can't just say that like the bad people hurt me and the good people help me. Like we're all kind of like fluctuating in between those things.
Yes. And I think anyone who reads your work will read that complexity, but also an ethic of care that you took in writing about your abusers. And understanding, I think, and there's a move we are trying to make in the thinking that throughout a young man's life in particular, that we could occupy the position of abuser, the victim, and someone who was complicit with oppression. And reading your book, you show that, and it disrupts the very neat categories we try to create of a toxic man, a victim, and a bystander. And you show that that is a spectrum that men move along in their life, and therefore there's a more nuanced intervention we need to make if we are to empower and transform the thinking of people in general, but young men in particular. Marlon, I would like to just push right on, I think, to a major argument in your book. Your book is a memoir taking stock of your life experiences, but fundamentally, it is a critique of the American dream, looking at race, gender, class, geography, social institutions such as education, and migrants or displaced migrants. Tell me, why you tackle a very big theme, but you're using it at
Yeah.
a smaller scale on the block? And I found that quite
Yeah.
profound.
So first of all, I gotta say, I'm a card. This is, people say it's a lot. These are like some of the best interview questions, but I mean, we're only two in, and it's just it's a different context, and I really appreciate. It. I really appreciate the way you're, leading this conversation. Um, I come from an interesting. I come from, so I'm from the hood, the ghetto. You see, you know, in Brooklyn and all that. My family, if I stay on Queen Street at times still. Or you know, people like Queen Street and Nelson Street, right? So I'm like really connected to, you know, to that type of social context. But I've also been able, particularly since my incarceration, I've been home now about 12 years. I've been able to travel the world over, right? And I've been able to be in ghettos in other parts of the world, right? In Trinidad, South Africa, I've been in, you know, other places where they're truly just like mine. And I think when I see and I travel from place to place or read or study all the work I've done, I see a through line through the experiences. Right? It might be a different name of a different gang or a different crew or whoever beefing for that in different, you know, but there's an underlying thing there, that there's an underlying through line there of hurt and harm and all those sort of things that's there. And then there's a political context to it. Like people aren't experiencing what they experience in certain neighborhoods just because they look that way. There's a literal political reason why people are in certain conditions they are. If you spend time in Trinidad, like, you know, it's horrible. We also know that they're like, one thing about, you know, I'm not sure I can say, but let me think about the way like international weaponry and all those things plays a role, and drugs plays a role in how Trinidad's underground economy sort of shows itself off. Like, yeah, in the ghettos and up in here and this side and behind that, you know, that bridge or whatever, yeah, they're doing harmful things, but there's a reason why you would go to Beaton now. Why Beaton look like this now, why it looked like this 10 years ago, and you go back. There's a reason, right? And it's not just because the people there, there's a political reason for it. And so for me, you know, I can see I get passionate about it. We denigrate ghetto people. And we don't, and ghetto people are doing what they can. Just like all people are remaking mistakes to do shit that is fucked up. Everybody do fucked up shit. You know what I'm saying? But like ghetto people also have an extra burden, you know what I mean? And it largely has to do with like how government policies, how isms such as all the different isms that we have in the world impact people on the block. You know, I'm from the block, and I've been able to see. I've been in offices with heads of state, like I've been in both, right? It's important for me to always, no matter what story I'm telling, where I'm telling it, that I need to be able to bring that element to the. I need to show you what's happening in the White House, impacting what's happening on the corner.
It's quite profound, and I think for persons who are interested in your craft will read, while this is a very intimate story that is thread, and there's a thread through people's lives, you use very powerful endnotes to anchor the history or the sociological context to what you're saying. And I found that very clever and very strategic in empowering the reader who may not be familiar with the geographic context or may not be familiar with that type of script and text. You are guiding them to more information. And that is quite powerful as an empowerment tool, very much like an activist tool for a young reader, where your narrative might be the thing that is resonating with them. But there's a deeper history, scholarship, and science you need to understand if you need to do a full critique of the system itself. I found that quite
And you do
profound.
it, and you do it from the way you know how to speak about it, right? That's why I listen to music. This book is deeply inspired by music, right? And that musicians are telling us all the time what's happening. They're telling us all the time. They're crying, they're complaining. They're telling us all the time. And you know, let's say particularly our younger artists, they're telling us, or even the one that we like want to listen to that, but they're telling us something, and there's usually a political connection to it. You know what I mean? They may not understand it at that moment, that the full understand the full width, depth, and breadth of it. But I think it's for us as adults, particularly those who've had experiences similar to or been exposed to certain things, to be always to humanize those people in a political context.
Yes. Before I invite you to read again, and of course, we would like to encourage the listeners to prepare their questions or comments that you may have for Marlon, and we will definitely facilitate that. One of the things I'm quite interested in is this discursively what the nigger is. There's the nigger in history, there's the society there. I say that niggerizes people. It creates an immigrant person who works well and and contributes to the economy, but could only participate on these terms, or is forced to hide in a certain way, they become the new niggers. But there's also a nigger on the block. Hey nigger, a niggers that we use for threat, and then the nigger that we use for endearment. And you use it, and perhaps it might be natural to you, but I'm seeing the nigger being deployed in very particular ways. And I want to tie it to something. This always looks lazy when we reference the first page of our author. He's like, you really read my book, you know? But I took it from L'étranger when we do French literature in secondary school here. The first page is the powerful page. You have on page 2, you said, too many of you hid in cages of your own creation, but mostly in cages created for you. Often the two were indistinguishable. And I felt that Oprah versus Jay-Z and 50 Cent nigga, it's so diffuse in society, but it's operationalized in different ways. We orient this concept of a nigga so differently. But you have, it seems, knowledge about why you're deploying this in a certain way. Why the nigger as a subject is so important to your work.
I think for one, as a communication tool, I understand, particularly in American context, per se, right? In American context, it's a communication tool in that the way we use the word has specific meaning. We understand what we are saying to each other. We don't need to qualify it. And for those in this audience, so for that reason, it's a community. I'm trying to understand. Just from a creative perspective, there's a certain type of emotion I'm trying to elicit in the reader, right? And that's a communication tool. From a macro level, though, it's used. I use it like in a way in which one is also empowering, also, but it's also showing that there is this like Jay-Z got something called "Still Nigga," right? And you know, in this song, he's speaking about how no matter where you are in life, there's this way that we can niggerize you, right? And me, even as a professional, and who was been blessed to do a lot of work with a lot of folks around the country, around the world, etc. Like there's always an elephant in the room of, is this a niggerization happening to me as a black man in a certain room, right? Like that even if it's not there, there is because of how society is, like the air of society, particularly somebody who's aware, um, you're thinking about that. James Baldwin, great writer, said to be a Negro in America is to be in a constant stage of rage, right? Right? It's like there's a constant reminder that the nigger also refers. There are ways in which people can put us under their feet, whether it be physically, whether it be economically, whether it be through opportunities, whether all these different things. And once again, I'm gonna call that, no matter where I get to go in life, like I saw like the most bare bone way in which say people are niggerized, right? It's modern day slaves. I spent a decade, my formative years, people's college years, the party years, all those years, I spent those years like working with people, right? I spent time inside counseling men and running classes. And so it was like me being able to, in so many ways, like while I was there, I was also like studying. It was sort of like an anthropological sort of study for me, even though I was a part of it, right? And I think as a writer now, as an activist, as an artist in various ways, that like using that term nigger is directly drawn from those experiences, right? From being in a place like that even. And seeing the whole scope of humanity. One thing about prison, Emma Call, you see the whole scope of humanity in a prison, especially been there for a decade, because it's one of the most, I would say, this is not what you asked me, I'm gonna cut off here because I know we're going too long, but I always say I learned to love humanity by being incarcerated. And that's because by being around the people in it, because you have to, particularly in the way I was somebody who helped other people, I worked and willfully helped people who did everything that you would hate. From the homicide to the sexual crimes to the, like all those things, I would like work with all those people and they would share their lives with me. And like I was able to see beyond the thing. You know what I mean? Anyway, this is not what you asked, but
No, and that's why you always offer more, and that is good. and I would
I'm gonna
invite
ask
you
a good
to
question.
read, and I will definitely continue with some more questions from the audience, and I think pick up from where we left off. So look forward to hearing you,
Well,
Marlon.
that's why I went a little bit over. All right, there we go. This is chapter 9, free-ish. The chapter's called Free-ish. Prison was hell. I hurt mommy so much. I know I did. For all my talk about supporting and listening to Black women, I disrespect my mother and her home. Mommy didn't deserve losing weight, her hair falling out because of stress, the crying every day and night, the feeling of shame from neighbors and family, detectives crowding into her home before the sun rose, the violating touches by a correctional officer during visit search, phone calls that cut her off mid-sentence, the insinuations from court officers that she wasn't a good mother, or her own self-guilt of not being a good enough mother to me. I was her baby, and I turned my back on everything she had sacrificed me. Broken people break people, even those whom they love, and I broke my mother's heart. And it gets worse. Back when I was clumsily hiding that I wasn't in control of my weed smoking, my partying, or my trauma, I was fully aware that I was hurting her and Daddy and Kelly and Mikey and Devon. The sadism was real. Every day I walked out of my apartment, I knew I could end up defending my life, and that felt so overwhelming, especially because I was dealing with it all by myself. No one knew I'd cry in prayer, asking God why he was letting all these things happen to me. I carried my pain with grace, as I still do. But back then, I had no understanding and that being abused by others so deeply affected how I comported myself. Back then, the only way to protect myself, or so I thought, was to ignore hurt, mine and those of others. Mommy did not deserve this. Mommy to me, known as Elsa to friends and to family and friends, and Petronella to white people. My mother is a reserved but spicy Trinidadian woman who could party better and longer than your mother. She seemed to juggle with ease, waking up at 5 a.m. to travel by train and carpool to work in White Plains, New York, cook for us when she returned home at 7 p.m., gossip for hours on the phone with her friends, be the one to check the front door was locked at the end of the night, party when she wanted, fend off daddy's new and stricter religious views, and window shop for hours in Manhattan on Saturdays with me and Kyle. It is also that she did whatever she wanted while caring for us. When Daddy became a Jehovah's Witness, he stopped partying, rarely drank, and cut out R-rated movies. Fun ended for him. Mommy party, drank, and cussed. She went home to Trinidad Carnival every year after she got her green card, even playing a mass while she was pregnant with me, and lived her best life like she should have. Playing a mass, Shuffle Masquerader, was the pinnacle of the Trinidad Carnival season. Playing a mass was born out of Brazilian and creative candomblé celebrations in Trinidad during the island's 18th century French colonization. Enslaved Africans were prohibited from the pageantry of the French pre-Lent festivities, so our people did what we do best. We created a better version of the French carnival by adding drums influenced by West African traditions. We mocked the French bourgeoisie with our homemade costumes, the mass. These Black people created joy through the act of rebellion. Kelly, Mikey, and I rebelled right along with Mommy too. While Mommy and Mikey and Kelly were partying all over Trinidad during the carnival season, on most days I played with kids in the area where we stayed, which was the Queen Street Planners in Port of Spain. The generationally neglected government housing complex is similar to the projects in Brooklyn or to Hanover Park in Cape Town, South Africa. Mommy let me roam in Trinidad. I guess she felt safe and free in the island of her birth, and she let me enjoy some of that freedom too. I used to have a crush on a girl named Marlene, and we would chase each other with sucker bags dripping from our mouths. That was my Trinity Road dog. There was my Trinity Road dog, Roy, who was a year or two younger than me. Roy and his family lived in an apartment directly above us. In the mornings, Roy would yell my name from outside, or I would do the same to him. It was our call that it was time to roam. We ran in random staircases with slippers and sometimes without them. We flew homemade kites, rolled in dirt, picked out the cars that were ours as they drove up Queen Street. I prayed freely in those plannings. I felt braver there than at home in Brooklyn.
Oh boy, Marlon. I mean, Marlon, I was raised in such a good home, and I know I would probably a little bit more about your Jehovah Witness upbringing. I was raised in a very Catholic home, and For some reason, when I was a teenager in Carnival, I key about 100 cars in Port of Spain, take a key and just running it down with my friends. And sometimes I look back like, what my mother do to make me like this boy? I grew up in a good home with good values and what less, but enjoyed myself because I also, and what I read in your story is the search for adventure as well as something very human, something very much for child and becoming. And sadly, for young men, the risk of trying to be a man at a very young age. So I'm quite interested in that work because in your writing, you often confront failure, sometimes as a son, sometimes a failure to meet the standard of machismo, the saga boy, the top man in your area. How do you confront that? Not how do you confront, you have, but why take up that role? Again, it's not the protagonist story of working through incarceration, this hero. But you talk about the failure to even meet the standard sometimes. I found that it wasn't even vulnerable. It was real because most of us actually fail.
Yeah, yeah. I see another question there about Liz Williams. Thanks. You know, like I said, man, it's important for me to be authentic to the experiences I've had, and authentic to the experiences to the people who were around me and the people I saw. And so for me, one, I wanted you, I think it's important for people to see themselves in these stories, even or their brother or their sister or their cousin, uncle, or whatever, like see it, or their incarcerated loved one who they don't talk to, right? Or who somebody who died too young. I want people to be able to sort of connect. Like, these are the possibilities for these folks. Like these are things that folks traverse. Some maneuver their ways around it, some didn't. It's just um, and the connection to you see obviously a great connection to the Trinidad experience. Um, a couple years ago, I spent some time in like different places in Sea Lots and up in Lamity by Gonzalez and different places, Beecham and all them type of places, like with people who who dealing with a lot and who might even be accused and are involved with a lot of things. You know what I mean? And I then spent time in YTC with young folks there. You know, and every time I go to these places, or I'm seeing me, versions of me. You know what I mean? And it's like I feel like it's a calling in some ways. For me to be able to, like, I don't want to just say tell stories, but also just create this conduit of empathy, right? I think about for I don't believe that incarceration works for much of anything, right? But I also don't think people realize the depth of what it takes to be so hurt to hurt somebody else, right? I don't think people understand the depth. That's a depth when you decide you're around people who want to hurt people, or you want there's something there. There's something happening there, and it might be happening too fast for you, or whatever. I don't know. I just know that, like, I need to be able to poke in those lines, and people and extrapolate those lines. Um, I'm not even sure it's a question you asked, brother, but I think it connects though.
No, it definitely connects and much respect. My father was from Lavantil, and I also work full time in Lavantil. So, yeah, and you make reference to those communities. I think it even shapes the vision of the work that we are trying to do actively. And I definitely have a question to follow up. But before I go, with the privilege of being the host, I would like to big up Naomi for submitting her question. She asks, what advice would you give younger writers who want to, as she puts it, radicalize their writing but don't know where to start?
Yeah, I seen this question. Thanks for that, man. Thanks for that question, Naomi. This is a part where I miss being in person, because I would have followed up. It's like, what do you mean by radicalize, Naomi? You know what I mean? But thanks for the question. I think um, what I'm getting from that question is giving me like, how do I make my writing as authentic to the experiences that I'm exposed to as possible, and to give probably like maybe an unpopular opinion or perspective on the thing, right? I kind of like I begin when I feel like I'm hearing to some extent. And I think the way you start is by I said it many times. It's like you have to tell the it's cliche, but you have to tell it like it is. And you have to poke in the holes. You can't just look at you have to be able to poke in the holes. And I think remember you're writing when you're writing this sort of thing. Remember you're writing for these people. So, I think the other thing is like when you're writing for certain people who you want to as you want to radicalize your writing, write to them. Write to them. Don't think about writing to, I don't know, who people you don't know. Write to those people, to that issue. Write to it. Like put it in front of you, in front of your computer, and write to it. That's how I would say. That's my advice.
Brilliant. I have a comment by one of our listeners on social media, and they also asked a question. They said, listening to you, they feel that in this book, as you said, you have written to people, it's a lot of reality that you confront. And they ask, what is the purpose and impact of this book you have produced, Bird Uncaged?
Yeah. I think the purpose is to find ways for people to heal. I think it's a journey of my healing process in community with other people. And I think that's the purpose of this book, for people to be able to heal. I think it's simple, and healing is hard. You get a cut or a wound. There's parts that might hurt, and you might have to, you have to pull off the bandage to clean it, so it don't get rotten, right? And that hurts sometimes. So I think that's the purpose of it. And the impact is evergreen. I think, I've had so I've been thankful for the way it's landed on people, right? And I think people are seeing it, and this is more than like a prison book, right? It's what I mean, not take away anything from that, but it's a deeper into the prison book, and it's not just about a physical cage, right? And I think I think the impact of it is for people that people will hopefully break free from the cage that hold them, right? Not only the physical cage, just thinking about incarceration and things, but we have in it. I talk about the cage of homophobia. I talk about the cage of homophobia. Like that's a cage in of itself. Like it prevents you from experiencing just being with other humans, right? Like, and I just want people to be able to, I think that's the impact of the book. But also on a much more minute scale and really pointed scale, community level, I want this book to be read by all teenage boys and girls. I really want to. I mean, I know we'll get to a thing like a dream project or dream whatever, but I really want to, and I want to be able to discuss with as many of them as possible in their languages, whatever, because it was painstaking for me to write this. It was hard, brother. You know what I mean? And I think the reason why it was so hard because I was not only bringing out all of me and my own personal vulnerabilities, but I was sort of trying my best to communicate what other people were experiencing too. And I speak about the sexual assault that happened to me, and even in that, I was like, I need to at least for me and for the paper to get some context to what that human being was going in that human being's mind. You know what I mean? And because ultimately, we don't want people who do sexual assault to do it again, right? And we can't. Don't think you go to prison and it stops people. Like we want people to not do that. Period. And I wanted to like for us to be as a society, part of the book, the purpose of the book is to heal, help people heal, and part of that healing also means how do we somehow engage in community healing with the people, or what is a process for community healing for the people who hurt us.
Well, Marlon, I must say, they were very difficult parts to read in your book. And what hurt me is that some people think the violence we experience in our lives is something spectacular, that this is an extraordinary event, and you show how diffuse and commonplace violence can be in our lives.
Yeah.
And actually, it challenged me, but I would love to hear you go a little bit more into that. Because as an activist, we have a side, and you have a side too. We have political commitments where we hold ourselves to certain standards because it's ethical to do so. But we also struggle for our values in the society. Who has the power, who doesn't have it, and why? And therefore, even though you are not an enemy of me, you are in some form of political enemy. There's some transformation in our beliefs, transformation in our policy, a challenge, right, to a political enemy that must be made because you want changes to benefit people's lives. But in doing that struggle, in defending the vulnerable, defending the weak, defending those who have been harmed and hurt, we also have to take up positions, or we may fail to do so, to be strong, because we know that one gun is more powerful sometimes than 100 people standing up against that gun. That one sexual predator could take advantage of young people for years in an institution, but you do something different. And it's a struggle I have as an activist myself, where we have to fight to stand up for the weak. You ask me to go a bit further. You ask of me to have intelligence about our environment. And that intelligence at its core is empathy, but a very political kind of empathy. Because people are vulnerable. And if we take the word vulnerable from its Latin root, vulnus, we learn that that word means the wound. So
Mm.
you are challenging us to move from political wins to having a deeply human project for the hurt. And those who have been hurt, that hurt people still. That was hard for me to even take on reading a text. And I found it quite powerful because I'm not there yet to speak to some of us.
Yeah, man. I, I give this example. So I mentioned YTC. So to a brethren who did community work, he had, was able to give me access to certain neighborhoods and to just meet with people in different community meetings. And but also one of them was to go to a prison, the youth jail, YTC. This is about 3 years ago, I believe, 3, 4 years ago. Anyway, the story is, so I'm and we're organized in this room, and it's for Juma services. That's how he got me in. He got me in through Juma services. That's how I can meet with whoever, right? So, so the young people come in anywhere from about 15 to about 22, 23, 24, something like that, right? In the room, right? And they come in and, they come in, they sit down, and there's one young boy who smaller in size, but you can tell that he's tall in personality. And then in the room, right? And he has a thing around his neck where it's like a picture of somebody. So I'm in the room, we're talking, we're having, we're conversing, and I asked him, who's the picture? Who's the picture on his neck? And he says it's younger brother. And he goes on to tell me that his younger brother was killed recently, a couple of months ago or so, apparently he said by police in Trinidad. And he had said though that, so he went on to tell me more. He went on to say that his older brother was currently in the same jail, YTC, but that his brother's not as tough as him, not as tough as him. He didn't think he could survive it. So, he was kind of like giving a story about like their mother, lost one son, and she's afraid that the other son may not survive inside. And so in some ways, his logic, he was like, well, I can go inside. I'm going to come inside. I'm going to go do whatever he's in jail for to help keep my brother alive or protect my brother. He's 17 at the time. And when you hear that, right, you think like, well, that's foolish. That makes no sense. And, all those, it's nonsensical. And yes, right, if you think about it, if you get to step away from the situation, you're like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But here's a person thinking that this is logical to take care of in his eyes, protect his family. And the reason why I give that analogy is when people are harming themselves and others in their community, they're making very difficult decisions. And decisions they're making probably aren't best. And it's not informed. Maybe they should ask somebody else. Maybe they should have learned from the last one. Yes, all that is true. it doesn't take away that they're in these positions, right? And so from, like, in speaking about the communities and the people and in these neighborhoods, listen, I've come from a place of believing, and from those, and I have many stories similar to that, right? But I come from a place of believing that, or I've been taught by my experiences, that it's like it's partly my role, but it's our role to care more, to find the humanity in the most harmful people. Because these are the people who are like, we want to figure out why people are doing the things that they do to try to stop people from doing the things, right? Think about the violence that happens in certain neighborhoods. It's generational in many cases, right? The same communities here in Brooklyn, LA, wherever you at, it's the same neighborhoods. And when you think about the political context that's oppressing those neighborhoods, but you also think about, like, well, these are people who are living on the outskirts of our neighborhoods, our societies, our villages. Is upon us as humans to find humanity in those people, because we want them to see the humanity in themselves, right? People who commit very harmful things, there's a part of their humanity. Like when somebody decides they want to go jump somebody, want to shoot somebody, want to whatever, there's something about them there's some part of their humanity that was already chipped. Something, I don't know, might have been what something chipped from them. And that wound, you spoke about wound and vulnerability, that wound is what we want to tend to before it becomes something that they practice outwards and they bleed on somebody else.
I agree, Marlon. Marlon, one of the things I working in high need and socially excluded communities, sometimes when you see people in communities debase their neighbor, in many ways they debase themselves.
Yeah.
It almost takes more out of someone to rob and shoot a person living on their street when they know they don't have a dog, when they know they don't have a gate, they don't have credit cards, and all the cash is in a shoebox underneath their bed or in a specific drawer or a vase or on their pocket. And they lose something in them. And you are trying to restore humanity and to look for it in all places. Like Bob Marley asked, have pity on those whose chances grow thinner. They're in no hiding place from the Father of creation. And I found that quite powerful in that very redemption-based arc for all of humanity that you have put forward in your work. Now I must say, Bocas Litfest and Bios and Bookmarks is sufficient. It is a powerful platform to engage writers, to promote ideas, to have critical dialogue. But the reasoning between you and the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean is insufficient, because we need a concrete bench, Marlon, to sit down and speak for hours, drink coconut water. You might like rum, but as a Rasta man, so I'll only drink coconut water. And we will sit down and talk at length. So I'll have one more question from a member of the listening audience, and then we will look to wrap up this evening. Jensen Samaru is from Guyana, and he said, I find it is difficult to write about oneself. There are certain aspects of yourself and certain experiences that may be a great lesson to others and have a great message to register. But there's an innate reluctance to be that open and exposed. How do you navigate that feeling? And I know you have
Yeah.
navigated it a lot.
Yeah. I don't think it's for everyone. I mean, to do it publicly. Let me say that. To do it, I think everyone should do it, but a book is a public piece of work. I was in therapy while I was writing the book, and so so that was one thing. But I think it was the reason. I spoke about the purpose of the book. The purpose is like the healing, right? To me, there's so many. Like I needed to do it, right? I needed to do this, and my one of my places of refuge is a pen, writing. That's it's my place of refuge. So I needed to do it. But also, I think when any writing, the memoir is difficult writing if you're writing it, if you're doing an honest book, right? You're not the protagonist of the book necessarily. And I think writing, you're doing it for reasons big other than you. And that's also so it's difficult for healing, but also there's, as I spoke about, all the other people that I experienced, that I've witnessed and had conversation with through all the years. Like, this is a conglomeration of all of that. You got to think about the vulnerability is not just to show me off. right? I'm not just trying to show myself off. It's just in so many ways to also model what I think we should be doing in our society. So, I mean, I navigated because I know there's a bigger purpose for it. That's how I navigated. Because with therapy and help from very close friends, right, support system, but also because I know it's something that I feel like our community needs to hear.
That's good, Marlon. Marlon, we're wrapping up now, but before you go, we have a scenario for you to play out, right? You step onto an elevator, but the publisher and editor of your dreams are in conversation about a very specific topic. It's up to you to pitch to them your dream project for that topic, be it a book, play, sculpture, musical album, anything creative your heart desires. And we have our prompt here for you to read.
Okay, the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. Um, um, I would like to have. I would like to have. I want you to be able to give me and my community money to be able to tell the stories of ghettos throughout the world, and whether it be and through written for and have people from these communities write the stories, produce funding to produce the televised series, the movies. I want and as a part of it, also every community that we highlight around the world, we raise a minimum of $1 million to support that community.
No, man, I
And
love
that
it.
and that way and that community can invest in itself and they create their own tools.
Create their own tools for their own liberation and freedom as you have
Hmm.
encouraged. Marlon, it was a pleasure reasoning with you. I think you challenge your readers in your book to think about environments and geographies, and I think that was more powerful. Sometimes we try to make people understand an individual hurt. You have done more to understand the historical injustices to a place and how people within that place get about their life. So you're speaking to us. The pandemic has created possibilities for us and also limited some. You have published a book during the pandemic in 2021, a very powerful book. You have the chance to speak to our audience with us here and us working through some of the social justice issues of our time, but also trying to move to a place of life and sustainability for ourselves. You have any words that you could give to us, not necessarily of comfort, but of empowerment to us?
Mm. Um, the last 3 words of my book are happiness is next, right? And that's how it ends. And I'm gonna end with that in that particularly throughout this book, there's a lot of heavy things to deal with in the book. But there's also hope. Like there's also light. There's also light. And I want people to be able to grope for the light. Like just know that it's there. You know what I mean? And also work towards it, but also know that it's there for you to grapple to latch onto. It is there, and I'm somebody who's seen a lot of darkness, but I'm somebody who's also always been sort of groping for light, right? Groping for light. Imagine me in a dark room and you're groping for light and you find it. That's how hard it can be. But just know that the switch is there.
Thank you very much, man. And we look forward to seeing you in Trinidad and Tobago sometime.
Yeah, we
Definitely
actually
connect.
exchange information and you ain't asking about winding up and thing,
No, no, no. I try to be civil and behave myself, as a respectable member of the community. So, but everybody, Marlon is a whiner. He makes some claims. So I tell him next year we're supposed to have carnival. He could test the hypothesis on the nation. Let him
All
enjoy
right, bro.
himself.
All right, good
He's
time.